kind of a fun ride. Who would have ever thought, I sure would not have, that several years ago, that a couple of months back, that I would be starting to do a talk show, so to speak, on Tuesday nights on Facebook Live. But here I am, and I've gotten so many people that have jumped on, that have appreciated it. They want me to continue to do it, so I am going to continue to do it. Um, this is kind of a weird time we're in, guys, and we've all talked about it before on here. We've talked about it just, if I know you personally, I know we've talked about it, just about how this pandemic it seems like it's continuing. It's like the Energizer Bunny, right? It's the gift that's keeping on giving. And at the very beginning of it, I think we were all pretty frightened. We were all scared by it. We didn't quite know what to expect, and so it kind of heightened our anxieties about it. Through the middle, I think we saw a lot of people getting more anxious and more depressed because they were just getting isolated feeling, and there was all kinds of just that social distancing was kind of being a problem. We weren't being able to be around people. And even for people like myself, who is an extreme introverted person as I am, I felt the disconnect maybe from some people. What we're seeing and what I'm seeing in clinical practice, and maybe we'll even ask Dr. Khan here in a minute about what she sees as well, but at this particular stage, I'm seeing people get even more agitated, more angry, more just ready for this mess to be over with. And we have to be very, very aware through just our own life, our own thoughts, and other people that we're around, what this hyper-vigilant type of space really can do to us. And so I think it's so important for us to be able to reach out to our friends, reach out to our family, reach out, even if we don't think that something's wrong, just reaching out and giving them a phone call or sending them a text message, letting them know that they're being thought about, because we're not around people as much as we have been. So I think it's important for us to continue to do that. Tonight, we're going to get to talk to one of my dear friends that I have reached out to over the past couple of weeks during the pandemic, and we've had dinner together, we've went and painted together, we're doing stuff, and she's about to teach me how to do stained glass, which I'm extremely excited about. I might have cuts all over my hands, and I might lose a finger or two, but I'm going to have a beautiful stained glass that I was able to do in my house. So tonight, we're going to get to talk with her, Dr. Jasmine Khan, who is a practitioner here in the Waco, Texas area. She has a very colorful story. She's from India. Her father was Indian. Her mom was an English lady. She's lived in India. She's lived in England. She's now in Texas. And so you'll get to hear her journey along the way. Most importantly, though, you're going to get to hear her journey of hope. And this is what I like to say. I was able to read the snippet of her story that she sent to me today as a preview for this. And I think as I read through it, the thing that just resonated in my mind is how much of a tenacious spirit, even through depression, how much of a tenacious spirit she has for life and to live it to its fullest. And we're going to talk to her a little bit about that tonight. So guys, I'd like to bring on Dr. Jasmine Khan. Jasmine, welcome tonight, and so thankful for you coming on here and kind of talking to me tonight and talking to the audience about your story. Tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, what brought you to Waco, Texas?
Long journey to get to Waco, Texas. I was actually born in a country called Cyprus in the Mediterranean Ocean.
Yes.
My father was Indian, so we went to live in India for a while, and then England. My mother was English, so I lived in England through my school years.
Yes.
16, ran away from home and came to Texas, because that's what you do, right?
Exactly. You went away from home to Texas.
Right. I was actually in Houston for 13 years, and then decided it was time to go to grad school, and Baylor was the first school that accepted me. So
Yeah.
I didn't know any better and just accepted and came to Waco. I
Yeah.
thought I was going to be here for 18 months.
Right.
Here we are 25 years later, and I'm still here.
And you're still
I
here.
think
Yeah. Texas kind of does that too, though. It just it sucks you in. It's like a vacuum. People get
Well,
here and they
Waco
stay.
did. Waco did it because it's a small town. I had come from this vast city of Houston.
Right.
And Waco was such a refreshing change from that.
Yes.
The traffic and the
Right.
20 minutes or an hour to get wherever you're going. And
Oh,
so
absolutely.
Waco grew on me fast.
Yes, absolutely. You know, and of course, the traffic in Waco's, it's not too great at the moment with all the construction going on the highway. So anybody who is coming to visit Waco, just expect some traffic delays along I-35. Hey, we have some people jumping in tonight. Stan Briggs, a guy that I know from the University of Mayor Hardin Baylor, just a couple of years ago, Stan, right? Welcome. I'm glad to see you. Also, Sandra Godley, my very dear friend Jasmine, that you need to meet someday from the BBC Radio in the UK from commentary. Welcome, Sandra. I know you're popping on for a minute because I know you got a show in the morning early, so thanks for jumping on. Speaking of which, girl, it's 1 o'clock in the morning where you are. You might want to go to bed. But anyway, thank you for jumping on, Jasmine. So, for Sandra, Jasmine, thank you for jumping on too. But as we begin your journey, what would you say was the first memory that you had of feeling depressed?
So I would never have identified depression. But I can tell you the very first time clearly when I first planned suicide. So
Wow.
I was 8 years old. My parents had been separated since I was 2. And so I would visit my father every other weekend, the sort of the standard visitation thing.
Right.
And my father came to our house one day and said that he was leaving and he was going out of the country and he was going to be gone. And that is the moment I became suicidal. At 8 years old, I clearly had a plan. It was a lethal plan. It was a doable plan. I had total access. And if I had carried it out, that would have been the end of the story.
Yes, and I think it's important for people to hear because, guys, at 8 years old, so many times, and Jasmine, you and I know this as being mental health professionals, so many times we don't believe that an 8-year-old is really thinking about suicide. This is proof, guys. This is proof in the pudding that we have to take these things seriously when you hear them say that they have a plan, right? So, Jasmine, at 8 years old, what was your plan?
My dogs.
Your dogs.
So yeah, at 8 years old, so shortly prior to that, I had seen a PSA program that talked about the dangers of playing on the railroad tracks. In England, we had railroads everywhere. And so at 8 years old, it was very obvious that that was a very lethal thing to do, was to lay down on a railroad track in front of a train.
Yes.
And we lived not 100 yards from the train tracks, so it would have been so easy, very easy.
Right. Well, and just to think, that is a very lethal way. And there's public service announcements. And here's the thing that it just struck me as you were talking about that. These public service announcements are meant to help people avoid the dangers and the pitfalls. Yet do we know that they may give an 8-year-old an idea of how to do it.
Yes.
So I think that's ever so important to be able to be in tune with your children and in tune with what their mental health is and what they're going through, to be able to assess whether or not they're hearing that as a safety tip or they're hearing that as a way out. And so that's incredibly powerful that at 8 years old that you had that. At that time you had been in England for how long? You had left India, right? Were you born in England or were you born in India?
I was born in Cyprus.
Oh, in Cyprus. That's right. You just said that. So then you came to England, and then so you were in England. How long before this? You had lived there for quite a while.
So I got to England at maybe 2 or 3 years old. So I was young. So I did all my school years there. So by 8, obviously I'd been there for 5 years.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And so at 8 years old, obviously you did not lay down in front of the tracks. From that part of the story, kind of what happened? Did you tell your parents? Did they know the severity of your thinking and the severity of your depression when you found out your father was basically leaving? You were being abandoned by him.
Yeah. So my father was gone at the moment he told me, and he was already gone. So he was gone. My mother was emotionally very detached, very cold. She made it very clear. I was very clear from birth, I think, that she didn't want children, that we were an inconvenience. So there was no communication or no connection with my mother to this day, the same thing. And so, no, I never would have told her anything, not especially at 8. Right. We were an inconvenience. We were raised to be not seen or heard, right? You had to be invisible. Right. By then, she had a new husband and who was supporting her and her, at that time, 3 children. And she did not want to inconvenience that man. He was providing, and the thing was, you don't inconvenience him.
Right.
So, it was clear that she would not have done anything.
Right.
To me, in mind, yeah.
And so what I've got on the picture, I've just popped a picture up for them to see of you as a small child. I think you're about probably 3 or 4 maybe, in your little your chair. It looks like a high chair. And look at the innocence of the face, and so the grin, And even at this point, what we realize is that I think he begins to start forming, and so by the time that you were young, like yourself, you're 8 years old, you begin to already have those thoughts. Yeah. So at that particular point, then Jasmine, what happened next in your story?
So somehow I didn't act on that, obviously, and like probably many people who have suicidal thoughts, you create a story that it will be better when. And I remember having those thoughts, it will be better when this happens or when that happens.
Right.
And then I remember my mother got pregnant. It'll be better when there's a baby.
Right.
Then we were going to move. It'll be better when we move. And those just continued on for several years. And I was clearly depressed. So, yeah, I just hit it. I sucked it up like people do. I was a quiet kid. I did well at school, so I never raised any eyebrows at school. At home, I was severely depressed. I'd sit in my room crying. I'd sit in the dark in the corner crying. There was one time that my mother found me in that situation, and she just basically threatened me, told me if she had to take me to a mental health provider, that they would think I'm crazy and would lock me up.
Oh,
so the message was, suck it up better.
Yeah, absolutely. The message was there is I don't want to be sent away. I don't want to be sent away. That was very scary. Yeah. And of course, during that time, even today, there's still such a stigma of mental health, which is why I do these talks, because I want to spread that awareness and destigmatize what mental health care is all about. At that particular time, I'm sure it was just a couple of years ago, right? Back in the 70s and 80s, actually, it was much more hush-hush. I remember, even as a kid, not hearing about anybody seeing a psychiatrist or a psychologist or therapist at all. I mean, you just didn't hear about that. You would hear, that person they're just nervous. And so she's just a ball of nerves. Well, you didn't hear about maybe what was causing it. So it was kind of a hush-hush type topic anyway. And then culturally speaking, it was also very hush-hush, in type of an environment that you lived in. So, so at that particular point, you learned then, I have to continue to depress. I mean, in other words, what I mean there is I continue to turn in, and there's no one to talk to. How did you deal with that? This is like, how old were you at the time? 12?
Probably at that, maybe 12, 13.
Yes.
At that point, I think probably things escalated and I started self-harming. Because you want to, and a lot of people misunderstand what that is about.
Could you talk about that for a second? Because I do think there's such a misconception about self-harming behaviors. Right. Talk about that. Speak to that.
So for me, it was, and I'm sure for many, so there's so much emotional pain that you need some relief from, and so you create physical pain. Because it does relieve you from the emotional pain.
Yes.
And, back in those days, of course, we didn't have internet to tell you, self-cutting or anything like this. Right. But I would burn myself. I would put acid in my eyes. I would find all kinds of bizarre things that I thought would cause pain, and they did.
And they did, right.
Yeah. And that's what I would do. And I did that for quite a while, probably for several years.
And Jasmine, in your own personal experience, I think this is where it's very unique. That you're now a therapist and that you help people with these things, because you can at this point see both sides of the coin. You can understand their pain. You can understand what's like. I never want to tell somebody, I understand what you're going through, because I may not understand at all what they're going through. What I do understand is pain. I understand anxiety. I understand what it feels like to be depressed. You, on the other hand, I do think have a different outlook on that when you're working with your own patients, is you may truly have an understanding of what it's like to have that dissociative quality when you're in that self-harm behavior, about how it really truly does detach you emotionally from what's going on, and to feel that physical pain to make it more real. I don't know. Describe to the listeners maybe kind of what was that process. Help people understand why that's so addictive.
I don't know that it was, I wouldn't necessarily use the word term addictive. I think it was just a relief
A leaf.
from from the emotional pain for a short window of time. You know, when you're focusing on physical pain, you're not thinking of all the emotional, right? So physical pain trumps emotional pain.
Right.
And so again, it's just that for a brief release, for just a short period of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So not addictive, but maybe I think what happens is it becomes so self-reinforcing that the behavior continues to sometimes continue and maybe even escalate. And so for you at 12, and you're going through all of this, you're dealing with also this emotional pain. From where did that take you into your next part of your journey?
So, I mean, that went on at 14. My mother kicked out husband number 2. And that same day, husband number 3 moved in. And from the day he moved in, he started trying to have sex with me. I was 14. And so there was nothing really I could do about that. But at 16, 2 days after I graduated high school, I left the country and came to Texas. So my goal there was to be as far away from that house as possible.
And you did. So, at 16, you just left, and you were able to get on a plane and leave.
Yep.
That's
I
amazing.
had been working since I was 12.
Right. That is amazing, isn't it? That you to think, someone who's 16-year-old today. I don't know if they would even get past security. You know what I mean? It's like you have to have your parents' consent. Yeah, exactly.
You can travel as a minor. Yeah.
Yeah. And so at this particular point, you came to Texas. You were 16 years old. Is that when you came to Houston? Is that your first stop?
Yes.
So you came Houston International from, I'm sure, London Heathrow. I've flown that flight.
A job at Astroworld, which no longer exists.
Yes, I know Astroworld. I got stuck in the gondola above Astroworld for about 3 hours. I go to my own trauma therapy for that.
That was my first job.
Yeah, well, that's fun. So you were there. So you were pretty gregarious at that time. You were here. It was a new life. It was a new adventure for you, and so you were ready to take on the world. Where did you go from here? You're in Texas. You're 16. You're working at Astroworld. What happens next?
Well, I've always had a good head on my shoulders for finances and money. I've been very smart with my money. Right. When you don't have a safety net, well, in my case, when you don't have a safety net, you're very careful.
Yes.
And so financially, I was okay. I had an apartment. I had to lie about how old I was to rent an apartment, but no one back then checked IDs.
It's amazing, right?
I was very sick, and when I got here, I actually brought sickness with me, because in England, what we know now is somebody living under extreme stress becomes physically ill.
Yes.
Before I left England, I was diagnosed with, I had cellulitis. I was bedridden for a while. I was bedridden through my exams, my O-levels. I had proctors come to the house. But anyway, so I brought this with me.
Right.
Once I was in Texas and I was going to the doctor, and I had cellulitis, I had the shingles, I had something else, one after the other. And I remember at 16, my doctor kind of joked. He said, "These are all stress
related. Yeah, autoimmune stress related.
He said, what does a 16-year-old have to be stressed about?"
Right.
But he just assumed a 16-year-old had nothing to be stressed about. He never asked any questions.
And never asked where your parents were.
No.
Isn't
never
that amazing?
Right.
Isn't
and
that
back
amazing?
in those days, no one did depression screenings. No one, no one asked, why is this 16-year-old would have all these illnesses?
Yeah, what could you possibly worried about? And so they wouldn't think to ask about the stress. And I'm just kind of reeling in my own head right now about why didn't they ask where your parents were? So I think we've come a long way in medicine, and come a long way in our job particularly, knowing that we can't even treat a 16-year-old without parental consent. It's very possible
that I was lying about my age. I remember having to lie about my age in a lot of situations.
So very possible, yes.
Yeah, so I did learn very quickly you had to say you were 18 for a lot of, like an apartment.
Yes.
Although my first one, I'm pretty sure they knew I was 16.
Yes.
But anyway, I do remember, yeah, in some
Yeah.
situations you learn to lie pretty quick.
Yeah, do you know, and let's talk about that first experience with the doctor here at 16 years old, because I think that self advocating for yourself is something that is very difficult, I think, for a lot of people to do. Particularly, I think, when people are depressed or when they're shameful about going through some of these experiences that maybe you've gone through, they tend to not want to speak up about that. And talk about the importance of really self advocating, because we as practitioners really, we're not mind readers and we're not going to know unless someone tells us. I think mental health practitioners are a little bit more in tune to dig for these things because we're trained to do it. But tell us, how can someone
Yeah.
advocate for that?
So, and you know, when somebody is struggling with depression, it is very, very hard to self-advocate,
I
right?
agree.
So,
Yes.
depression plays games with your brain. It tells you no one cares. It tells you no one wants to know. I, at
Hmm.
that point, of course, didn't know that anything was, mental health wise wrong with me. I don't think I'd ever even heard of depression.
Right.
But
That's
it
right.
would never have occurred to me to say, hey, I have all these thoughts, or I don't want to live, or it never would have occurred to me at that point to
Hmm.
speak up about anything like that.
Hmm.
Right? I mean, I was
Right.
there because I was in physical pain. Again, the shingles, if you've never had shingles, is excruciating.
I've heard.
Uh,
Yes.
yeah, so, but to speak up for mental health, and it just never would have occurred to me to
Hmm.
advocate. And even in my journey since then to now, 40 years later, it still can be hard. I think for that, it's only fairly recently that I've been able to just tell a doctor, hey, I'm depressed, I need some meds.
Right.
It took a long, long time to be able to do that. What I wish, as looking back at my childhood especially, is I wish other adults around me could have seen the clues.
Right.
There were clues there that was something seriously wrong,
That's
and
right.
nobody saw anything.
Right. Right. And that is the tragedy to all of this. And
Yeah.
that's what brings out those emotions, right, Jasmine, is
Yeah.
because we know that there are other people who've gone through this, who don't have the ability, really. And I want to talk about not having that ability, because it's not that they don't want to talk about it. Sometimes they just can't. They can't
Yeah.
bring it up. They
Right.
can't, exactly what you're saying. And so
Right.
it's ever so important, that we really start looking for these warning signs.
Yeah.
Yeah, goodness.
Especially in children who don't know any better.
And who don't know any different.
Right.
That's part of the
Yeah.
issue is there as well. It's like you're saying is, even at 16 years old, you're still a kid. You're still a young child. So if any 16-year-olds out there are watching, I mean, you're still a young kid, and you
Right.
haven't had those experiences to be able to really notice what depression
Yeah.
might be. You might
Right.
just think that's normal, that people
Right.
live like
And I'd
this.
already been threatened that mental health, if I have to see a psychologist, it means I get locked up. So
Right, right.
you sure don't tell anybody about
Yeah,
those feelings.
exactly. So for all of you that are jumping on, hey, Jason Akers, Erlene Swain, Carlton Pridgeon, Amy Beeson Mills, Bobby Ann Awalt, thank you for joining us tonight. We're talking with a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Jasmine Khan, who's a therapist here in the Waco, Texas area, talking about her journey, not just her professional journey, but her personal journey through depression and through suicidal ideation. And coming up soon, you'll hear some of the other parts of her story. And so, again, we're talking about at 16 years old, Jasmine, coming over, you're talking to this physician. He's all of these physical ailments that you've got going on. And tells you as a 16-year-old, gosh, these are all anxiety-related issues. These are things that are brought on by stress. What could possibly be stressing you? As opposed to, wow, Jasmine, let's talk about what's stressing you. There's a different way of assessing that, right?
Right.
And so from there, at this point, you've been basically trained throughout your entire life to not speak about your mental health, to just really keep it zipped. You're right.
Right.
So at that particular point, at 16 years old, you've had this experience in another physician's office who has not addressed this with you. From here, where do you go? At this point,
Yeah.
what's
So for me at that point, at 16, I'm in Houston, Texas, in this big wide world, and
mhm,
I think at that point I just kind of kicked into being a teenager. I was working. You start clubbing because back
mhm.
then no one carded you, and
And you have a
I
good
just
time?
got busy with some stuff. And you
Yeah.
date, and you're
Hmm.
just trying to figure things out. And I guess I was
Right.
just trying to figure myself
Right.
out.
Right.
And so for that period of time, I don't remember like severe suicidal thoughts. I know most of my life they have been there, at least in the
Hmm.
background, but I don't
Yes.
remember any significant, like serious times up until 25.
Hmm.
Um, so by 25, I had been dating a guy for 3 years, and
Hmm.
he was in college. I was not. And or maybe I had just started actually. He had inspired
Hmm.
me to go to college,
Hmm.
to university. And so we'd been dating 3 years. He was about to graduate. And I don't know, I thought it was kind of normal that when somebody graduates and you've been together that long, that the relationship moves forward and maybe you get married or do things like normal people.
Right.
And I approached that with him, and I'm going to get emotional.
Hmm.
And he said, "No, I could never marry you.
My
You're
goodness.
not my religion, and you're not from my country."
My
And
goodness.
that was a dagger in my heart
Yeah, it was abandonment 2 and 3,
all
or
over
4 or 5. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
just another abandonment that you feel like you're just not worthy enough for somebody else. So that
right,
then goes in and it begins to start being your narrative that you're playing over in your own mind.
right. So at that point, the suicidal thoughts just went in overdrive, total overdrive.
Wow.
Um, Now, since I was 25, um, from being suicidal at 8 years old, that's a long time to make plans. I had
Yes.
backup plans and backup plans and backup
Hmm.
plans.
Hmm.
One of the things I had done was hoard pain medicine, all kinds of drugs, all those illnesses. They were
Hmm.
very happy giving you pain meds back in those days.
Right.
But I
Right.
had hoarded a lot of medication. And
Right.
so one of my boyfriends along the way gave me a gun because he's a single young lady, and I was,
Right.
as a child, some
Yes.
guy said, "You need a gun," because, we're in Texas.
Right.
So I had a gun.
Right.
Uh, Excuse me.
Hmm.
So at that point, I was really, really depressed. I did take an overdose. I
Hmm.
swallowed as many pills as I could get down, and I swallowed them with gin, because I
Yeah.
figured that would just make sure that,
Yeah.
do the
Kind
trick.
of. That's the caps it
Um,
off. Right.
but I did pass out. I threw up all through the night. The next day, strangely enough, I decided to go to the doctor because I
Hmm.
was hallucinating, and I knew that was
Right.
probably a problem.
Yes.
So I went to the doctor. It was the same doctor that I had had since I was 16.
Hmm.
And I told him I was hallucinating, and he was asking a few questions. And then I started crying, and he
Hmm.
just looked at me and he said, "Why are you crying?" And I just said, "Because I want to die."
My goodness.
Yeah. So at that point, he acted appropriately. At that point, he wouldn't let me leave the office
Right.
until
Right.
he had made an appointment with a psychiatrist, and
Yes.
got me into an appointment, and I went that afternoon to the psychiatrist.
Yeah,
Right.
so even at that point, it's interesting that we weren't hospitalized. You weren't hospitalized for your suicidal ideation. You were just basically set up with an appointment and hoped that you would maintain and you would go to that appointment. So you weren't hospitalized at that moment, were you?
No, and he also didn't ask if I had actually tried to do something.
Right. So
He never asked.
let's talk about that for a second for people who are watching. Mary Holly Flippo, thank you for joining. Mary Holly Flippo's husband's also a therapist, so she's very aware of this. And Artie Eastland, my cousin. Hey, Arthur. We want to talk about a couple of things. So when someone is saying, "I want to die," we are, as mental health professionals, are trained a little differently to do this. We ask some very specific questions, right?
Hmm.
How do you want to die? What do you want to do? What are your plans?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Do you have a plan?
Hmm.
Right? Is there one active?
Right.
Do you have the means to follow through with the plan? Right? And so these are things that are very important questions that we can ask people. And I think it's so important not to worry about asking people these questions. Don't
Yeah.
worry about asking them. You're not going to plant the idea. The idea is already there, folks. You've got to just ask them. And so at this particular point, this physician didn't ask you that. He acted very appropriately, of course, about getting you an appointment with a psychiatrist, pushing you forward. But maybe one or two things are happening. Maybe he didn't think it was as serious. or maybe he didn't know. But whatever the case might be, I think it's very important for us to advocate for this, right? Advocate.
Right.
And when I say advocate, not just us as mental health professionals, friends, people
Yes.
that are out there that you know that are having these. These are questions you can also ask. That way you know how serious their plans are. And then we can get them help. So, Jasmine, at this point, you didn't get hospitalized.
No.
You did then go see the psychiatrist.
Right.
And
So the
so,
psychiatrist, yeah, let me tell you. So
yes.
I think he was like 110 years old. His wife had died, and he was in his own grief.
Oh, wow.
And our sessions focused on his grief. He talked about himself and his losses. And
It just compounds the situation for you, doesn't it?
right. Not only that, after 4 sessions, now I was 25 years old working. I don't know where I was working at that particular time. Oh yeah, I do. That's okay. I was, not making much money.
Right, right.
And after 4 sessions, he tells me that I owe him $600. That his, services cost $150 an hour, and I need to pay him, and it's not covered by any insurance.
Oh my goodness.
Obviously, at that point in my life, I did not have that kind of money, and so he said, "All right, then we're done." That's
My goodness.
it. And he sent me packing, and no referral, no resources. And so again, the next reinforcement here is if you're not rich, there's no help. Nobody cares. Right?
Right.
So I was completely on my own.
And not only that message, but what slaps me in the face is you're not even worth the $600. If you can't give me $600, you're not even that valuable. You got to go.
Right.
And that is a major, major message that we send to people when that happens.
And not even a referral. I mean, now you and I, if we can't provide a service, we're going to give referrals, right?
Yeah, 3 referrals here, 3 referrals.
We need to know where in the community somebody with no resources can get some help.
Right. Absolutely. Do you know, and again, as we go through the story, I don't want to continue to interrupt your story, but these are such good points to make for people to advocate for yourselves through your health care. Number one, you should never start a therapeutic relationship with anybody unless informed consent is agreed upon. Meaning the cost for their services, what you can expect for their services. If, in fact, you're going to have to pay, what that payment agreement is going to be. All of these things before you start the relationship. Right. And so for him to have done that 4 weeks in, or 4 sessions in, he had already broken a lot of what today I think we are very, very conscientious about and making sure that informed consent happens. Because so many times people don't know that they're not covered. And then what do? Do you just abandon the patient? I don't think so. I don't. Right. I can tell you straight up, I don't.
I guarantee you I don't.
I just see him for free, if that happens, because that's the most important thing. So at that point, Jasmine, you're 25 years old at this point. You've got this person that you've entrusted. This is also the thing. You've entrusted your story to. Or you tried, because he was talking about his own grief, which is the other thing to be very careful about, right? If your therapist is talking about their grief. Right. At that point, you were rejected again. It was another abandonment for you.
Let me just bring up 1 second, Jason. On the psychiatrist, also, he never asked me about a plan. He never asked me about current suicidal thoughts. He knew I was referred to him because I said I wanted to die. I did tell him about the overdose, but he never assessed current lethality. He never asked those questions, and he did not put me on antidepressants.
Unbelievable.
And at that time, there was antidepressants available.
Absolutely.
But he did nothing, none of that.
That's incredible.
Bye. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Unbelievable how just counterproductive and harmful that is.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And so at this point, you're 25 years old. You're very depressed. You've wanted to die for many years, since you were 8 or even before. You've had attempts along the way. What next for someone who is in this particular situation?
I had actually reached out to my mother. I reached out to some friends. I reached out to some other relatives, and the door was shut in my face everywhere. So at that point, I went and bought hollow point bullets for my gun, and I shot myself in the head.
My God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. At
Um,
that point, you did the most drastic thing that you could think of to do to end it.
yeah. And in
Yeah.
my mind, that was 100% certainty. There was no doubt in my mind,
Mm.
right? Can
Hmm.
you imagine when you pull the trigger and you're still alive? It's like,
Yeah.
what? I can't even do this right.
I know. Yes. I know. It's like at that particular point, nothing has worked.
Right,
Nothing has worked.
right.
And then
So,
there you are. I mean, at the particular point, because I know this part of the story. At that particular point, you were alone in your apartment
my house.
or
Yeah,
your
I owned a
house.
house.
Yeah, you were
Yeah.
alone in your house. Nobody was there. And at that
Right.
point, after you pulled the trigger, you did successfully shoot yourself and injured yourself very badly. Very badly. And at that point, you had the wherewithal to pick up the phone. But you
Jason, I
thought,
remember, Jason, very, very clearly when the what the fuck moment passed, like,
right,
why am I still alive? Because
right,
that's really what it was. Excuse my language.
that's all
Um,
right.
I had dropped the gun, and the thought went through my head: do I pick up the gun and fire again,
Hmm.
or do I reach for the phone? And my hand reached for the phone,
Yeah,
and
just
I dialed
instant.
911. But if you imagine the trajectory of a bullet through
Yes,
your skull, it
right.
went from my chin up into my temporal frontal lobes here.
Hmm.
I couldn't talk. It has gone through my mouth, my tongue, and my, yeah.
Right.
So I couldn't talk. So I kind of grunted in the phone, and then I just lost hope and hung up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And at that point, just figured that this was going to be the place that you died.
Yeah.
At that point, Jasmine, did you want to die anymore? Or is at that
At
point,
that point, yes. Still, yes.
uh-huh.
So, you know, it was really, I mean, I think at that point I was still very ambiguous because I'd called and then I put it down. But then what happened, and this all took a long period of time. This is Houston, Texas, big city. So there was a knock on the door eventually, and it was a policeman because they have to check on 911 hang-up calls. So he knocked on the door. I tried to get up, and as I tried to get up, lightheaded, I was gushing with blood,
Right.
and I lay back down. I couldn't get up.
Right.
And he left. He knocked once and then left. That is the moment that life drive or whatever, that life instinct kicked in.
Mm-hmm.
That was the person that was going to save me, and they left.
Right.
So as she picked up the phone again, grunted into the phone, they told me, do not hang up.
Right.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little side story here because so I'm on the phone grunting into the phone, and by then the emergency calls had gone over, the 911 again, the radios, and a neighbor of mine who was a wrecker driver heard these calls coming in, and he was like 2 or 3 doors down from me. And so he decided, when he drove by my house and saw no emergency vehicles there, he decided to come in. And so he knocked on the front door. I started banging on the wall with the phone. They got a headache. But I was banging on the phone, and he said, I can hear you, I can hear you. And he went to all the doors and windows, and I had left the back door open because I knew someone was going to have to come into the house. So he came in, and this poor man, he's a wrecker driver, not EMT or anything like that. He came into my room. The blood had to have been ridiculous. And I saw him walk in the door, and I tried to hand him the phone. I'm still fully conscious. I'm handing him the phone, and he took one look at me, and he freaks out. And he's jumping up and down, screaming, hollering. And I'm just laying there holding the phone for him to pick up. But after he'd had his moment, he grabbed that phone, and he was all business. Single white female with a gunshot to the wound, laying on the bed, bleeding out, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And then
and then it was on.
Everybody arrived.
Right.
Everybody started arriving. Yeah.
And so at that point, you had been there. How long do you think? How long do you think you were lying there before the ambulance was
I
able to
think
get
at least 45 minutes.
Right.
How I didn't bleed to death, I don't know.
Right. Yes.
It took six units of blood that day when they got on starting immediately when they put me in the ambulance. They started pumping me with blood.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And then on your way to the hospital, at that particular point, they were doing everything they could to save you, to save your life.
Right.
And you
Right.
got there and you went,
Bentop Hospital.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I couldn't breathe because my tongue by then was swelling and choking me. All everything else was blocked. So yeah, their main thing was trying to keep me awake because at that point I was ready to go to sleep, which is very dangerous at that point.
Right.
So they kept talking to me and asking me questions, and I'm grunting, and they're acting like they understand me. There's no way they understood a word I said, but that was their way to
Yeah,
engage
to
me.
engage you
Uh,
and keep you
so that
talking.
EMT guy in the ambulance was incredible. He was, I mean, I cannot give him enough praise
Hmm.
as far as just engaging me and taking
Yeah.
care of me. He was amazing.
Do you know,
He,
and what
yeah.
strikes me there is this is the first person in your entire story that actually gave it to him. You know what I mean?
And the record
Yeah.
driver to
Yeah.
help. They showed up. He came and checked.
The record driver and the EMT were the
Right,
first
and then the
people who showed
EMT.
you that you were worth it, that they cared. Wow.
They told everybody that gathered at my house that I wasn't going to make it. So nobody expected me when I got to the hospital. They put me on the life support on the ventilator through a trach, but they didn't think I was going to live.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yes.
they told everybody I wouldn't live. Yeah. So,
Yeah. And at that point, you were in the hospital because they took you directly into an emergency surgery, didn't they?
yeah, just the trach,
The
just a
trach.
trach.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And then they left me alone. So not all the damage was left. Nothing
So
was
no
done because
surgery at
they
this point yet.
no, just a trach.
I guess because at that point they didn't expect you to survive the
Right.
injury.
Right. Yeah.
And then how long were you on the trach before you realized, they realized that, you know what, this Jasmine Khan lady, she's not going anywhere.
It was 7 days later. 7 days, some surgeons came and asked me to sign some papers, some release papers. And when you're trached, you can't speak.
Right.
And I remember telling them, so in the emergency room, I was conscious. I was conscious in the emergency room. I could tell you nightmare stories about that because they thought either I was unconscious or couldn't feel anything. I don't know what they thought, but I could feel everything.
Wow.
One of the things they do in the ER in that condition, they paralyze you, right? But they don't put you to sleep. They just paralyze you while they cut and do all these weird things. And so I was very aware of everything they were doing. So when those surgeons came and asked me to sign just a release form, I remember writing on there, "Do not paralyze me." And they didn't understand what I was saying. And then finally they figured out, oh, ER, they do that. They paralyze you and you're wide awake. So
Wow.
that's, yeah. But then they did a massive surgery. Really what they did, that my eye socket, my frontal lobes, they took bone from my skull. They fixed all the, skull. They actually peeled off my whole face. I have literally a scar from ear to ear.
My goodness. Yeah.
They peeled off my face to do all the bone work. And yeah, so I have 4 plates in my head.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you had a major reconstruction,
Right.
major reconstruction surgery. So again, guys, we're talking to Dr. Jasmine Khan tonight. For the people who are popping on, Mona Swartz, thank you, Mona, for joining, or Mona Lisa Rose. I know her from Fairfield, Texas, from a long time ago. Michael Taylor, Skeeta Jenkins. Hey guys, thank you for jumping on tonight and hearing the story of what I consider probably one of the most moving, I think, stories that I've heard, and where we're going to in the rest of the story is, I think, what brings this to be such the moving story to me, because at this particular point there was someone else in this hospital that became very, very instrumental in your recovering from your depression and recovering from this. If I'm not mistaken, it was a resident psychiatrist.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And did that happen immediately then, Jasmine, as you were, recovering from the surgery, or was it something that they sent you as an aftercare plan?
So no, I was on the life support for a month, and you can't talk. So yeah, until the trach was out and I could start talking. At that point, this resident came to introduce himself,
Mm-hmm.
Um, then they actually kind of tricked me into signing myself into the psych ward. And then he saw me there. Oh, actually, I didn't
We
meet
do
him
kind of
until,
do that sometimes, though, don't we?
yes. I actually didn't meet him until I got to the psych ward, actually. Now I'm remembering this. And I
Uh,
remember our first meeting was not good.
right.
Our very first meeting was only like 5 minutes, and
Hmm.
he immediately talked about depression and putting me on meds, and I got mad. I said, "You don't even know me. You're just assuming, and your first thing out of your mouth is to put me on drugs."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was mad.
Yes.
So the next day he brought me, and I had never heard this word depression, so
Right.
I didn't know this is what it was.
Right.
So the next day he brought me some literature on depression, on medication, on antidepressants, and we actually had a conversation. But his
he he thought he better get his stuff together. Oh
poor
goodness.
guy.
That's beautiful. Do you know? I think the beauty behind what I'm hearing there is it might have been the energy that it took from you at that particular point to get you into a different trajectory for your life. At that point, you were telling him, "I be dadgummit, you're going to know me. You're not going to do this." And so at that particular point, you were in the psych ward, you were in the hospital, having had a very near completion of a suicide. And they were telling you you might be depressed, and you were like, "Hang on a second, maybe, possibly." You're still trying to figure it out yourself.
Because I didn't know what that meant. To me,
Right, right,
depressed was you're sitting in a corner crying. And
right,
I wasn't. I hadn't been. My life was functional. I
right.
went to work every day. I paid my bills. I was functioning.
So important for people to hear that. Guys, if you hear this, if you're watching, and share this video for other people to hear this story, because what she just said, I think, is so vitally important for so many of us to hear. People with depression who are suicidal can be extremely functional people. They go to work. They do their duties. They go home. They are a family man, or they're a mother and a wife. They do these things. It doesn't mean that they're not depressed. It means that they're just really, really functional people.
Right. They can, and we get very good at putting on a mask.
Yes.
The mask that I need to put on for any given role, and I was very good at that.
Right.
Still am.
Right.
Still am
Right.
good at it. Yeah.
You've learned.
Yeah.
You learned. You were trained. You were trained. You were trained as a very young child to put the mask on and to be okay,
Yeah.
and to not show those emotions. So at this particular point, you're in the psych ward. He's talking to you. He's obviously making some kind of a relationship with you because, if I'm not mistaken, you kept him around for 4 years before you didn't
I
fire
did.
him.
Right. Yeah, and I think initially it was just desperation. It's like somebody throws you a lifeline at that ready. I mean, at that point, I was
You
ready
were
to
ready.
grab it.
Yes.
And as a resident, he was all over the place. You know, he did different residencies at different places, and he let me follow him everywhere he went. I even got services at the VA. I
Yes.
got services at some other hospital. I mean, wherever he went, he somehow talked them into letting me come and get
Yes.
services.
Yes.
Yeah. And of
So
course, he put me on antidepressants.
he
I
talked
think I
you
was
into it.
breaking, okay.
Finally, he talked you into it.
Finally.
So at that particular point with this guy, what was the difference? What was the difference with this particular psych resident, not a full psychiatrist yet even, a psych resident that made the difference for you?
So, he listened to me, right? And, you know, there's things I would look back now as a practitioner, and I wish he had done some things different, but he didn't abandon me. He
There you
was
go.
there. He
There you go.
listened.
He was
He
real.
tried to get me to talk, even though it was
Yes.
pulling teeth, I promise. But he never abandoned me, and I think that is the big one, the not
Yeah.
abandoning.
Absolutely right. It was the relationship.
Yeah.
It was the relationship that proved that you were worth it, that you were worthy, and no abandonment. So no matter what his theoretical orientation was, no matter what his approach was, he was there
Yeah.
for you,
Right.
right?
And even
That's
like I
beautiful.
said, he moved locations
Mhm.
for 4 years. He had so many residencies,
Right.
and everywhere he went, he made sure that somehow I could still
Yes.
work with him.
Yes. Not only did he not abandon you, he drug you along with him.
Right. And adjusted his, like, there were some places that had maybe a $20 minimum of fees, and
Hmm.
I could, maybe if I couldn't pay it, we adjusted it to $5, and he did
Hmm.
whatever to, make sure I could manage it,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
Have you kept in touch with him?
I did for at least a decade, and now I actually looked him up the other day. So yeah, I did lose touch.
Yeah,
But yeah, I kept it. I did. He knew. I'd sent him a letter when I got my PhD.
yeah.
Um, so I've kept in. I did for a while.
That's really cool. That's really
Yeah.
cool. Do you know? And there are those patients that I've had too that years later that I've remained in contact with and have had very dear relationships and friendships with it later on in years.
Mhm.
That they've gone through what they've gone through, and they're functioning beautifully. And Jasmine, that's the thing. That's the part of the story today that I want people to hear as well. Not only were you a survivor of this, and every time I hear that somebody's a survivor, I've survived something, kind of makes me think I'm on like some stranded island out in the middle of the ocean, drinking coconut juice, waiting for the ship to come in. You not only survived, you're thriving. You're a thriver. You're a thriver because not only have you overcome the odds of almost completed suicide, you've gone on to get your PhD in mental health counseling. You are a mental health counselor. You are giving back to those people. You're hearing and accepting those people who need to be heard and accepted. I want people to hear that part of your story. Tell us what you're doing today.
So I have my own practice. I
Yes.
work mostly with teenagers. What a
Yeah.
surprise. The first 20 years of my practice, I mostly worked with foster kids,
Yes.
again, very severely damaged
Yeah.
children. Now I mostly work with troubled teens through the juvenile system,
Yes.
but they are also highly rejected,
Yeah.
in very challenging situations. And not only that, most of my kids that I work with also have criminal behaviors that make people reject them even more.
Yeah.
So
So you
I
go
work,
you go in for the tough ones,
I,
the ones
yeah,
that quite frankly sometimes don't want the help.
yeah, and
Yeah.
nobody else wants to help them.
Right.
They're rejected by everybody.
Do you know? Oh gosh, will you agree to come back and do some more shows with me because I have there's about 5 topics I could go off on here now with you, but one of them here is not it's the people don't want to work with. I sometimes wonder if it's the people that we as mental health therapists sometimes don't know how to work with. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's like it takes a very special kind of a thought process to be able to work with people who don't want your help. They don't want it, but yet you still stick around and you still
Yeah.
do it.
A lot of it is not that they don't want help, they don't trust help, and it takes a while to gain that trust.
Yes.
Right? Because, and especially when you're talking to teenagers, they do want to connect. They do want the help. Somebody just
Right.
has to reach out to them.
Right. And stick around when they've been rejected because they're going to reject you. They're going to reject you, right?
Yeah.
Because they've been
Yeah.
rejected, so I'm going to reject you
Right, right.
first. You're not going to hurt me because I'm getting rid of you. And you have that ability, Jasmine, to stick to it and stick there with them. And to prove to them, just like that resident proved to you, and the record driver and that EMT, that you're worth it. We're sticking with you through all this. So you've done so much, but in your life, you and I talked a little bit before we came on about all the racing and all the running that you've done, and I kind of jokingly said, "My goodness, that right there will take life out of you." You've ran how many marathons and half marathons?
So I don't know, probably maybe 200.
I people, I want you to see on the
Looking at my
screen.
list.
I want you to see on the screen. I had her send me this snapshot before we came on tonight because I wanted you to see a visual representation what tenacity and a tenacious spirit can do for you. Look at these medals. Every one of those are medals that this lady in front of us tonight has just earned by running races. Half marathons, 20-mile runs, 5Ks. You've completed, I think, what did you say, 6 full marathons?
and also triathlons, like
Eh,
half irons and yeah, so triathlons as well,
yeah,
swim, bike, run. Yeah.
you are just a slacker. I tell you.
Yeah, because I've never done a full Ironman, and I'm never going to either.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. It might be in your future. Look at these medals, folks. But it's not only that, but you live life to the fullest. I mean, one of my favorite pictures, of course, of you is this sitting in front of the Taj Mahal. This is back in your homeland of India, your father's
Yeah.
country. What does it mean to you to go back to India sometimes? Is it bittersweet for you?
No, that trip was a very different trip. It was very different. Normally, as a child, I had gone to my family's village,
Hmm.
village, massive city. So that last trip with the Taj Mahal was purely as a tourist, which was very weird and different.
Right.
That was the first time I've ever been there and stayed in a hotel.
Huh.
Normally I'd stay in at my grandfather's house, so
Yeah.
that was very different.
And might have eaten meat on that trip as opposed to just the rice and stuff that you would have otherwise. I learned that from you, that
Yeah.
that
Meat.
the common people in India, so to speak, people who are not ultra wealthy,
Yeah.
don't eat a lot of meat. They eat more of the vegetarian
Rice and
dishes.
beans, yeah, just like
Yeah.
most of the world, yeah.
Yeah, which by the way, launch in a couple of days or something at Saffron.
Yep.
But anyway, so then you also Machu Picchu. So not
Machu
only
Picchu.
not only do you run marathons and you run all these things that you hike. You're a world traveler. You know, Jasmine, you take on everything with such vigor. Do you think that your experiences of life have led you to that kind of I don't want to say what is the word, like when you jump out of planes and all these things that you do,
Well,
you got this adrenaline junkie, there's the word. Are you
sort of
adrenaline?
yes, sort of yes. I still struggle with depression, and planning these trips or planning these adventures that I go on gives
Yes,
me something to look forward to. Those are my threads, my strings to give me something ahead to look forward to.
yes,
Planning a trip gives me such excitement, and it just lifts my spirits. And of course, you do the trip and the memories. So that is something that just keeps,
yes,
fueling and me to
yes,
kind of keep me up, right?
yeah, and,
Otherwise,
and
I get really down.
exactly. So it gives you something to look forward to. It helps
Hmm.
you to not continue to depress. You're
Yeah.
actually moving forward. This is a picture of you not moving forward, but moving downward as you're rappelling down the waterfall in Ecuador. It's like, again, all these things that I would love to do, I think I'm just too chicken, but maybe you might get me to do it one day.
Yeah,
And one of my
let's go.
favorite things is here you are with lions. Tell us about this picture. Where are you
Um,
here?
That's in Germany. That's at the Berlin Zoo. So that was rather cute. I was doing actually, I had gotten laid off from my job, and so like people do when you're laid off, I decided to backpack around Europe because isn't that what you do when you get laid off? And so I got off the
Of
train in
course.
Berlin. I got off the train in Berlin, and there was a zoo, and I'm like, oh, let's go. And it said something about pictures with the lions, and so I go in, and I guess most people were afraid of the lions because they just tentatively give you one. And so the first
Well,
one, they put this lion on my lap, and I have this biggest grin from ear to
yes, you
ear, and I'm
do. Yes, you do.
snuggling on this creature, and they're like, give her another one. And so then there's pictures of me with two lions sitting on top of me. And again, I had to have the biggest
Yeah,
grin
and these are
in all
not
of
small
creation.
babies. These are fairly hefty looking little lion cubs. Yeah, it's just fine. So, just that vigor that you live life with. And I think for those of you who stuck around and heard the story, tonight, Kay Welch, I so appreciate you jumping on, and yeah, it's such an incredible story to hear of how you've come from a pretty dark place in your history of growing up, where we think that people have all these fond memories of their childhoods and growing up with moms and dads and the little white picket fence around the house. Not so for you, and it didn't stop. It continued to progress and progress to the point to one day that you actually then did have a very serious attempt to end your life. But through that, meeting the people who were like, no, we're not giving up on you. You are worth it. You are lovable. You are someone that needs to be on this planet. They saw through that to help you see through it all the way to the other side, Jasmine, and now you're doing that for the people who other people aren't doing it for. I That's the most beautiful story, quite honestly. So I don't view this story as a sad one. I view the story as one that's come full circle. I know my life is better and more enriched having you in it. And I know that the people that you work with are so fortunate to be able to have somebody who doesn't just treat them, but as you said so beautifully earlier, understood you and listened to you. And that's what you're doing for them. That's the beauty of your story. That's the beauty of your story. And so thank you so, so, so much for just your transparency, your honesty, your authenticity, to be able to be this vulnerable in front of people. That's why I do these shows, because it's truly about dispelling the stigma of what mental health is and what it isn't. And so I appreciate that so much. And guys, I want you to look behind her. Do you see behind her on that wall? Not only does she run, not only does she hike, she's a world traveler, she's one of the most incredible artists I know as well. And earlier I told you she's going to help me do my own stained glass. But I want people to see what's in my living room. This was a piece that Jasmine did for me. Oh, didn't do it for me. You did it, and I told you I liked it. So basically, I kind of talked you into letting me have it. But so there it is, guys. Look at this. It's beautiful. And the thing for me, I love the Tree of Life. The Tree of Life has always been something for me that's been very special and very important. It symbolizes so much. It symbolizes our deep roots that we're grounded in, but it also symbolizes the growth that we have throughout life. And so it's always been a very special thing to me. And so when I was at your office, you hosted a concert for me, actually, that I did a concert there at your place. When I saw it the first time, I fell in love with it immediately. Having heard your story now, this piece of stained glass hanging in my house has a whole new meaning to me. This is you. This Tree of Life is you. And for you to be able to let go of that, to let me enjoy it, is something very special. Jasmine, thank you. But folks, look at that. Isn't that beautiful? So now I'm going to get you to teach me how to do it.
All right.
All right. As we begin to wrap up, Jasmine, I always like to leave the audience with some tips, some things that they can do. One of the first things that I want to make sure that people know is if you have mental health issues and you are feeling suicide and you are feeling as though you want to end it all, please reach out. These are the suicide prevention hotline and the treatment per referral hotline that I have listed on the screen. Please write those down. Keep them in your phone. If you know anybody who needs them, please make sure that they get those. Help them reach out. Because as you've heard tonight, when we're depressed and when we're in those states, sometimes we don't think to reach out ourselves. Call them, be with them, help be an advocate for them, help them find their voice and through this. So Jasmine, as we leave, what do you think for you to leave the audience with the most I think three tips that might be so vitally important for them through their own journeys of mental health and how to maintain a positive mental health?
Definitely find people, solid friends that you can be honest with, that you can let down the mask with. I think that is number one.
Yes.
Not be afraid to ask for help when you need it. And when certain people don't listen or don't understand, don't take that as a rejection. They just don't know, and go find somebody else.
Right.
And that's a tough one because a lot of people do reject or minimize or blow it off. Some of the things that I've heard over the years, even from mental health professionals, obviously you weren't serious about your suicide attempt.
Right.
Okay, I shot myself in the head, really. Or what do you have to be depressed about?
Yes.
It's your life, right?
Yes.
You see my life. You're telling everybody about my wonderful life. I still get depression. It doesn't matter what the life on the outside looks like.
That's right.
Right?
That's
That
right.
pain is on the inside and is very real.
Right.
So we have to somehow, I mean, it's hard, but advocate for yourself, reach out, find people who will listen, find people who do take it seriously, find people who will give you a shoulder when you need a shoulder.
Yes. Absolutely. Everybody, please take those tips down. Know that you can advocate for yourself, help advocate for others. And Jasmine, thank you so much for tonight. I so appreciate your willingness to give your time. I will talk to you very soon, I promise.
Okay.
So, good night, friend. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good night.
Good night. Guys, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. All your comments are coming in. We'll try to go and we'll respond to each of them as they come through. There was a lot I couldn't keep up with in talk there. So if I missed you, I apologize. We'll definitely give you a shout out. If you or someone else that you know needs somebody to talk to, please reach out to the suicide hotline at 1-800-273-TALK-8255. Again, it's 1-800-273-8255. Or the treatment referral hotline to find a provider in your area that you can go and talk to. And that number is 1-877-726-4727. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. This is a wrap.